What if the one thing you believe would destroy your life is actually the only thing that can save it? We're taught to believe that world should stay separate, the rich have their path, and the poor have theirs. But what happens when destiny, with a wicked sense of humor, decides to shatter those walls? This isn't just a story, it's proof that sometimes the most profound changes come from the most impossible situations. It's the story of how a simple housekeeper shares a room with an arrogant millionaire. His life changed forever. Imagine a man, Eli Price, who has everything money can buy: power, influence, and a fortress of solitude built on arrogance. In his world, people are disposable assets. Now picture a woman, Zoe Scott, a housekeeper in his mansion. She has little in terms of possessions, but carries a universe of dignity, kindness, and a secret dream she protects with all her might. They exist in the same house but on different planets, separated by a chasm of wealth and class. But a sudden disaster, a twist of fate they never saw coming, forces them into the one thing they both would consider a nightmare. They are made to share a space, breathing the same air, their two worlds colliding in a single tiny corner of the mansion. This arrangement, born from chaos, promises to be a battle of wills, a clash of pride and prejudice. Yet, it holds the seed of an unbelievable transformation, a quick reward of emotional truth for anyone who has ever felt judged or unseen. This is the story of how that shared room became a crucible for redemption, and how the quiet kindness of a housekeeper managed to dismantle the walls of an arrogant millionaire, proving that his life truly was changed forever. Before we dive into their incredible journey, we want to connect with you. Please let us know in the comments what beautiful city you're watching from today. We love to see how far our stories travel. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that touch the soul, and share this with someone who needs to see that kindness can truly change the world. Have you ever stopped to think about how destiny works? Sometimes it weaves its grandest designs in the most unlikely of places, bringing together worlds that, by all accounts, should never touch. On one hand, you have the universe of Eli Price, a millionaire encapsulated by shimmering luxury and cold indifference, where everyone has a price tag. On the other, the reality of Zoe Scott, a simple housekeeper, whose worth is measured in quiet dignity and the tireless work of her hands. A collision, frankly, wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. At the very top of his gilded empire, Eli Price moved with the unshakable certainty of a man who believes he controls the universe. To him, people were merely pawns on his personal chessboard, and the notion that his life could be changed forever by someone outside his elite circle was laughable. He was the very definition of an arrogant man, shielded by walls of wealth and power, utterly oblivious to the rich and poor tapestry of life unfolding beneath his own roof. Meanwhile, padding through the silent, opulent hallways of the grand mansion, Zoe Scott performed her duties with a quiet, unassuming grace. She wasn't just another uniform, there was a light in her, a fundamental kindness that went unnoticed by most. She carried a secret with her, a dream that bloomed in silence, far from the critical eyes of her employers. This young housekeeper had no idea that her resilience and spirit were about to be tested in the most extraordinary and unexpected way. Then, like a joke played by fate itself, the unthinkable happened. It wasn't a request, and it certainly wasn't a choice. A situation utterly beyond anyone's control forced a proximity that defied every social rule of the house. The news landed like a bombshell, a complete surprise that shattered the carefully orchestrated routine of the mansion. Suddenly, the invisible, yet deeply felt, barrier between the millionaire and the housekeeper was about to dissolve in the most shocking manner. The initial reaction was precisely what you'd expect from an arrogant millionaire, confronted with what he saw as an invasion of his sacred space. There was no room for a love story in his life's rigid script, only pure, unadulterated contempt. For Eli, the presence of Zoe in his personal sanctuary was an affront, a silent humiliation he had no intention of tolerating. For Zoe, it was a trial of overcoming, a challenge to keep her head held high against the gathering storm. And so the stage was set. Two souls, one hardened by obscene excess and the other shaped by a dignified lack, were locked together in a gilded cage. This forced cohabitation wasn't just about sharing a physical space, it was an impending emotional confrontation. The arrangement promised sparks, tears, and perhaps an unforeseen redemption. But for now, the only certainty was the palpable tension in the air, leaving a silent, hanging question: how on earth could this possibly work? The sheer absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Eli Price. He, a man whose privacy was his most fiercely guarded commodity, was now expected to share his personal quarters with his housekeeper. It felt like a bizarre dream, a farcical plot twist designed specifically to torment him. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a violation of his world order. He couldn't wrap his head around how this bizarre turn of destiny could possibly be happening to him. Zoe Scott, on the other hand, approached the arrangement with a quiet dread that she masked with professionalism. For her, it was a minefield of potential humiliations. To be in such close proximity to this arrogant millionaire was a daunting prospect, a daily test of her ability to remain invisible. Her simple life was about to be put under a microscope, and she knew that one wrong move could cost her the job she desperately needed. This was her own personal challenge of overcoming. The initial days were a study in icy silence. Eli moved through his suite as if Zoe were a piece of furniture he was forced to tolerate, a ghost in the machine of his luxurious life. He was determined to make her feel so unwelcome, so small, that she would somehow simply evaporate. His coldness was a weapon, and he wielded it with precision, hoping to drive her away. He truly believed his life was ruined, not that it was about to be changed forever. But Zoe possessed a strength Eli couldn't comprehend. It wasn't a loud or defiant strength, but a deep, quiet resilience. She absorbed his silent contempt and carried on, her dignity a shield he couldn't penetrate. This wasn't the reaction he expected. He was used to people cowering or lashing out. Zoe's calm perseverance was a silent surprise, a minor but persistent anomaly in his perfectly controlled environment, a flicker of something he couldn't quite name. This forced arrangement was more than a logistical nightmare, it was a slow-burning emotional experiment. It placed two people from opposite ends of the social spectrum, rich and poorito, a pressure cooker. There was no escape, no buffer of staff or cavernous rooms to separate them. They were stuck, bound together by a bizarre twist of fate, and the air crackled with unspoken words and resentments, a far cry from any sort of love story. The question hanging between them wasn't just about how they would survive the coming weeks. It was about what would break first: his arrogant resolve, or her quiet endurance. Neither of them could have guessed that this strange, forced intimacy was the first step on a path toward a profound plot twist. Something had to give, and the foundation of Eli's world was about to show its first crack, all because of a leaky pipe. It all started, as grand life changes often do, with something utterly mundane: water. A burst pipe in the staff wing, a catastrophic failure of old plumbing, unleashed a torrent that turned hallways into shallow streams and rooms into damp, unusable caves. The entire lower level of the mansion was a write-off, a soggy mess that would take weeks, if not months, to repair. Suddenly, the meticulously organized world of the rich and poor was thrown into chaos. Panic scurried through the management staff. Where would the live-in employees go? Hotels were an option for some, but for Zoe Scott, the head housekeeper, it was more complicated. She needed to be on site, a constant presence to oversee the complex operations of the estate, disaster or not. Every guest room was accounted for, booked for an upcoming event. The management, wringing their hands, found only one deeply problematic solution. It was a small, forgotten room, more of a large, walk-in dressing chamber, Eli adjoining Eli Price's master suite. It had its own entrance from the hallway, but also a connecting door to his private space, a door that hadn't been opened in years. It was the only dry, habitable spot left. The suggestion was floated with extreme trepidation, fully expecting the arrogant millionaire to erupt in a fury of indignation. It was a logistical necessity, but an incredible social surprise. For Eli, the news was less of a suggestion and more of an assault. The idea of his housekeeper, a virtual stranger, sleeping just a few feet away, separated only by a door, was unthinkable. His suite was his fortress, his sanctuary from a world he already kept at a significant distance. This wasn't just an intrusion. It felt like a siege, a breach of the highest order. His life, he felt, was being systematically dismantled, not changed forever for the better. Zoe, upon hearing the plan, felt a cold knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. Sharing a space with the formidable Mr. Price was a terrifying proposition. She would be a guest in the lion's den, a constant reminder of the chaos that had appended his perfect life. It felt like a recipe for disaster, a direct path to being humiliated and likely fired. Yet, she had no choice. It was this or unemployment, a stark reality she had to face with her usual stoicism. And so, with a heavy heart and a small bag of her belongings, the housekeeper was installed in the chamber next to the king. The connecting door remained shut, a thin barrier between two vastly different worlds. But its presence was a constant, humming reminder of the bizarre destiny that had forced them together. The plumbing disaster had set a new, far more emotional and unpredictable story in motion, and the first chapter would be written in anger. Eli Price's fury was a cold, quiet thing, far more intimidating than any shouting rage. It settled over his suite like a winter frost, chilling the air and making every surface seem sharper, harder. The first time he addressed Zoe directly about the new arrangement, his voice was clipped, devoid of any warmth. He laid out his terms not as a request, but as an imperial decree, determined to make her life a living hell. He was an arrogant man pushed to his limit. He drafted a list of rules, a ridiculous and demeaning set of commandments that he left on the small table outside her chamber door. She was not to make any noise that could be heard through the connecting door. She was to use her hallway entrance exclusively and never, under any circumstances, knock on his. She was to be invisible, a nonentity, a ghost who just happened to be sleeping in his closet. He was trying to humiliate her into quitting. Zoe read the list, her heart sinking with each cruel line, yet her expression remained placid. This was a test, a clear challenge of overcoming the sheer disdain of the man she worked for. She folded the paper neatly and placed it in her pocket, a silent acceptance of his terms. She would not give him the satisfaction of a reaction. She would not let this arrogant millionaire break her spirit, no matter how much he seemed to enjoy the disparity between rich and poor. His determination to ignore her was a palpable force. If they passed in the grand hallway, his eyes would look straight through her, as if she were made of glass. He never used her name, referring to her only as the housekeeper when speaking to other staff. It was a deliberate, calculated effort to strip her of her humanity, to reduce her to a function, a problem he was forced to endure. But this Cold War had an unintended surprise effect. In his effort to erase her, Eli became acutely aware of her presence. He found himself listening for the soft click of her door, the faint scent of her simple, clean soap in the hallway. He was trying so hard to pretend she wasn't there, that she ended up occupying a larger space in his mind than anyone else in the mansion. It was a paradox he refused to acknowledge, an annoying itch in his brain that he couldn't scratch. This was not part of his plan. Zoe, for her part, simply got on with it. She followed his rules to the letter, moving through the house with a quiet efficiency that was almost supernatural. She was a master of being unobtrusive, a skill honed by years of service. But beneath her compliance, a quiet resolve was hardening. She wouldn't be humiliated into submission. This forced proximity was a battle of wills, and she had no intention of being the first to surrender, unaware a love story could bloom from such ashes. Zoe's response to Eli's Cold War was a masterclass in quiet defiance. She didn't argue, she didn't complain, she didn't show a single flicker of resentment. Instead, she met his icy hostility with an unwavering, professional dignity that was, in its own way, a fortress. She polished the surfaces of his life until they gleamed, organized his chaos with an invisible hand, and performed her duties not just perfectly, but with an artist's touch. It was her own quiet form of rebellion. But she went further than mere duty. She began to perform small, almost imperceptible acts of kindness. A fresh, single wildflower from the garden placed in a small bud vase on a side table he rarely glanced at, the newspaper folded to his favorite section, his evening tea, which she wasn't even tasked to prepare, left on a warmer, knowing he often worked late and missed it. These were gestures so subtle, they were meant to be felt rather than seen. Eli did notice, though had never admit it. At first, he dismissed them as part of her job, a housekeeper's calculated attempts to win favor. But the gestures were too personal, too quiet. There was no showmanship to them. They were like a secret conversation he was having with a ghost, a silent offering of peace in his self-imposed war. This unexpected kindness was a language he didn't speak and found profoundly unsettling. He was a millionaire used to grand gestures, to people fawning over him for personal gain. Zoe's quiet care was different. It asked for nothing in return. It was a form of kindness that existed for its own sake, a concept so foreign to his world of transactions that it baffled him. He found himself looking for the small changes in his rooms, the silent evidence that she had been there, and it began to chip away at his arrogant facade, ever so slightly. This was the strange reality of their forced cohabitation. He, in his opulent suite, was the one who was truly isolated, trapped in a world of his own making. She, in her small borrowed chamber, was the one extending a thread of human connection. The dynamic between rich and poor was not playing out as he expected. He was the one with all the power, yet he was beginning to feel a strange, unfamiliar vulnerability in the face of her simple decency. He was still cold, still distant, but the rigidity of his anger was beginning to thaw at the edges, even if he fought it tooth and nail. He was determined to maintain the wall between them, to continue his campaign of ignoring her. He didn't know that he was about to accidentally stumble upon a piece of her life, a secret part of her that would make ignoring her utterly impossible, changing his perspective forever. The moment of change didn't arrive with a thunderclap, but with a whisper. Eli was returning to his suite late one evening, exhausted and irritable after a brutal day of negotiations. As he approached the hallway leading to his and Zoe's doors, he heard the faint murmur of her voice. Annoyed that she was breaking his no-noise rule, he paused, ready to barge in and reprimand her. But the tone of her voice stopped him cold. It wasn't loud, but it was filled with an emotional weight. He stood silently by her door, an unwilling eavesdropper. It was a phone call. Zoe was speaking to, it seemed, her younger brother, who was clearly distressed about money for school. "No, you listen to me," she said, her voice a soft but firm blanket of reassurance. "We don't give up. It's just a hurdle, that's all. We're good at overcoming hurdles. You and I'll figure it out. I always do. You just focus on your studies." The word overcoming resonated in the silent hall. There was no self-pity in her voice, no complaint about her own struggles. There was only strength and an immense, unconditional love. She spoke of selling a small piece of jewelry her grandmother had left her, talking about it not as a sacrifice but as a simple solution, a tool to fix a problem. She laughed, a sound Eli had never heard before, and it was light and genuine. "It's not a secret," she said. "It's just a plan." This was a side of his housekeeper he never imagined. Eli stepped back from the door, a strange feeling churning in his gut. It was a complex cocktail of shame and a dawning, grudging respect. He, a millionaire who could solve any financial problem with a flick of his wrist, was listening to a woman with so little give so much, so gracefully. The stark contrast between their worlds, the rich and poor, had never been so blazingly clear. His problems were about numbers on a screen. Hers were about the very fabric of her family's future. He retreated into his own suite without a word, the list of his petty, demeaning rules feeling like ash in his mouth. The arrogant certainty he had always carried began to feel hollow. He had judged Zoe Scott as a simple housekeeper, a functionary, a nuisance. But the woman on that phone call was a titan. She possessed a depth of character and a reservoir of kindness he had never encountered in his own circle of glittering, self-absorbed socialites. That night, the silence from the adjoining room felt different. It was no longer the silence of an inferior subordinate he was successfully ignoring. It was the quiet of a woman with a rich, complex, and difficult life, a life she navigated with, a grace he now found himself envying. A tiny seed of curiosity was planted in the barren ground of his arrogance, and he had a surprise feeling he wanted to know more. His life was about to be changed forever, and it started with a single overheard conversation. If Eli's world was a polished cold diamond, his girlfriend Tiffany was its sharpest, most flawless edge. She arrived at the mansion like a whirlwind, of expensive perfume and casual disdain, her eyes scanning every surface for imperfections. When Eli, with visible reluctance, explained the temporary arrangement with the housekeeper, Tiffany's perfectly sculpted lips curled into a smirk. She saw Zoe not as a person, but as an opportunity for some cruel sport. She found Zoe in the main library, dusting the leather-bound books. "Oh, you must be the one," Tiffany began, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "The poor thing displaced by the plumbing. It must be so thrilling for you, getting a little taste of how the other half lives, even if it is in a closet." She deliberately knocked over a small, ornate vase, shattering it on the marble floor. "Oops, clumsy me. Clean that up, would you?" She was determined to humiliate Zoe in front of Eli. Zoe didn't flinch. She met Tiffany's malicious gaze with a calm, steady look. She knelt, carefully picking up the larger pieces of porcelain. "It's no trouble at all, miss," Zoe said, her voice even and clear. "Accidents happen. It's a bit like life, isn't it? Things break unexpectedly. The true test of character isn't in preventing the breaking, but in how gracefully we handle the pieces afterward." Her response was a quiet, dignified checkmate. Eli, who had been watching from the doorway, felt a jolt of surprise. He had expected Zoe to be flustered, to stammer an apology, or to shrink under Tiffany's venom. Instead, she had handled the attack with an intelligence and composure that was utterly disarming. She hadn't just cleaned up a mess, she had exposed Tiffany's cruelty for what it was, making his girlfriend look petty and small without raising her voice. This simple housekeeper was anything but simple. Tiffany was left speechless, her attempt to assert dominance having backfired spectacularly. She scoffed and stormed off, but the damage was done. In that moment, Eli saw his girlfriend through a new lens. Her snobbery, which had always accepted as part of their world, suddenly seemed ugly and cheap. It stood in stark contrast to Zoe's quiet integrity. The vast gulf between rich and poor wasn't about money, it was about character. Later that day, the image of Zoe's calm face and her wise words echoed in his mind. The incident left a far deeper impression on him than he cared to admit. He had witnessed a small but significant battle, and the victor wasn't the one with the diamonds and the designer dress. A strange, protective feeling began to stir within him. The plot twist wasn't just in his living arrangements, it was happening inside his own head. The universe, it seems, decided Eli Price needed more than one lesson at a time. Just as the fragile truce in his suite was settling, his professional world imploded. A nine-figure merger he had spent months building, a deal that was meant to be the crowning achievement of his year, suddenly began to crumble. A key partner was getting cold feet, threatening to pull out over a minor clause. The entire deal was hanging by a thread, and Eli was left spinning. He became a ghost in his own home, pacing his suite like a caged tiger, his face etched with a stress so deep it was painful to see. He barked into his phone at all hours, his usual arrogant confidence, replaced by a raw, ragged desperation. He was isolated in his failure, surrounded by employees who were too intimidated to speak to him, and a girlfriend who offered nothing but platitudes. He was a millionaire on the verge of a massive public defeat. One evening, as he stood staring blankly out his window, Zoe entered quietly to turn down his bed. She hesitated, seeing the turmoil radiating from him. Against her better judgment, she decided to speak. "Sir," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper, "my grandmother used to say ... when you pull a knot too tight, you only make it stronger. Sometimes you have to loosen the rope, give it some air, before you can find the way to undo it." Eli turned, his eyes flashing with irritation. Folk wisdom? He was on the verge of losing $100 million, and his housekeeper was offering him folksy platitudes from her grandmother. "Thank you, but I don't think a nursery rhyme is going to solve this," he snapped, his voice sharp with dismissal. He immediately felt a pang of regret at his own harshness, but his pride and stress were too overwhelming. He turned back to the window, ending the conversation. Zoe simply nodded, a flicker of hurt in her eyes that she quickly masked. "Of course, sir." "Good night," she said, and slipped out of the room, leaving him alone with his collapsing empire. She had offered a small branch of kindness, a piece of her own world's wisdom, and he had arrogantly swatted it away. The gulf between the rich and poor seemed wider than ever in that moment, a chasm of misunderstanding and pride. He spent the rest of the night staring at spreadsheets and legal documents, his mind racing in circles, pulling the knot of his problem ever tighter. Her words, however, had lodged in his brain like a splinter. Loosen the rope. It was simple, foolish, and had absolutely nothing to do with corporate law. Yet he couldn't shake it. He was at a dead end, and the only new idea in his head was the one he had so cruelly dismissed. The hours bled into one another, each one bringing Eli closer to the brink of failure. His lawyers were out of ideas, his partners were panicking, and his own mind was a tangled mess of aggression and desperation. He had tried everything: threats, revised offers, more pressure. He was pulling the knot with all his might, and just as Zoe's grandmother had predicted, it was only getting tighter. Defeated, he slumped into a chair, the words of his housekeeper echoing in the silent room. Loosen the rope. Give it some air. What the hell did that even mean in a business context? It was absurd. Yet, in his exhaustion, his mind finally quieted enough to actually consider it. What if he stopped pulling? What if, instead of pressuring his wavering partner, he did the opposite? What if he loosened the rope? It was a counterintuitive, almost insane strategy, going against every aggressive instinct he had ever honed. A new angle began to form in his mind, a surprising and radical idea. He wouldn't just stop pressuring the partner, he would call him and offer to release him from the deal entirely, no penalties. He would give him an easy way out. He'd express understanding for his hesitation and wish him well. It was a massive gamble. It could be the final nail in the coffin, or it could be the very thing that loosened the knot. It was a plot twist no one would ever see coming. With nothing left to lose, he made the call. The partner on the other end was audibly stunned into silence. He had been expecting more threats, more lawyers, Instead, he got understanding and freedom. The tension immediately evaporated from their conversation. Freed from the pressure, the partner started talking openly about his real concerns, which were minor and easily addressable. He wasn't afraid of the deal, he was afraid of being strong-armed by the arrogant Eli Price. By the end of the half-hour call, the deal was not only saved, it was stronger. The partner, moved by Eli's unexpected show of grace, recommitted with renewed enthusiasm. Eli hung up the phone in a state of shock. It had worked. The simple, folksy wisdom of a housekeeper had just saved him $100 million. The surprise was so profound, it left him breathless. His entire philosophy of business, of life, had been turned on its head. He sat there in the pre-dawn light, staring at the connecting door to Zoe's room. She was more than just kind, she was wise. A wisdom not learned in boardrooms or Ivy League schools, but from a life that required a different kind of intelligence. He, the celebrated millionaire, had been completely outmaneuvered by a problem until he used the insight of the woman he had treated with such contempt. The foundation of his world wasn't just cracking, it was beginning to crumble. The morning after the deal was saved, something shifted in Eli. The cold, arrogant wall he had so carefully constructed around himself now seemed ridiculously fragile. He saw Zoe in the hallway, and for the first time, he didn't look through her. He looked at her. "Zoe," he said, and the use of her name was a surprise to both of them. "I wanted to thank you. Your advice was unconventional, but effective." It was the closest he could get to an apology, a clumsy offering of peace. Zoe was taken aback, but simply offered a small, knowing smile. "Sometimes the oldest ideas are the most sound, sir." I'm glad it helped. There was no "I told you so" in her tone, just genuine warmth. That small interaction cracked the door open, and Eli's newfound curiosity pushed it further. He started finding excuses to talk to her, asking about the book she was dusting or the music she might be listening to through a single earbud while she worked. Slowly, layer by layer, the woman behind the uniform began to emerge. He discovered she wasn't just a housekeeper, she was fiercely intelligent, with a dry wit that often caught him off guard. She was well-read, devouring books from the library in her spare time. She spoke about economics and history with a clarity that rivaled his own expensive education. He was discovering a secret, not of scandal, but of a brilliant mind hidden in plain sight. He learned about her ambition. She wasn't content to be a housekeeper forever. She was taking online courses at night, saving every spare dollar for a future she was meticulously planning. Her story wasn't one of passive acceptance of her station, it was a tale of active, determined overcoming. The more he learned, the more he realized how little he knew about the world and about the true nature of the division between rich and poor. Their conversations became less about him being the millionaire boss and her being the employee, and more about two people connecting. He found himself asking for her opinion on things, small at first, then larger. He was fascinated by her perspective, a viewpoint untainted by the cynical, self-serving echo chamber of his own social circle. She was real, and her reality was beginning to feel more authentic than his own. He started to see the world through her eyes, and it was a world filled with more nuance and quiet dignity than he had ever imagined. The arrogant man who had laid down cruel rules was being replaced by someone else, someone more curious, more humble. He hadn't just discovered an intelligent woman, he was discovering a better version of himself. But he was about to uncover a much bigger secret, one she kept hidden away from everyone. One afternoon, Zoe had a rare day off to visit her family. A document Eli needed had been accidentally misplaced in the suite, and in his search, he found himself near the small chamber she occupied. A large, plain-bound book was peeking out from under her neatly made bed. Thinking it might be the folder he was looking for, he pulled it out. It wasn't a folder. It was a sketchbook, heavy and worn. clearly a cherished possession. His first instinct was to put it back, to respect her privacy. But his curiosity, now a constant companion, got the better of him. He opened it, and the world fell away. Page after page was filled not with doodles, but with breathtakingly original fashion designs. Dresses, coats, and gowns flowed across. The paper with an expert's hand. They were bold, innovative, and beautiful, a fusion of classic elegance and modern edge. He was holding her secret in his hands. Each design was annotated with notes on fabrics, construction, and inspiration. He saw sketches inspired by architecture, by nature, by art from the books in his own library. This wasn't a hobby, this was a passion. It was the work of a true artist, a visionary. The quiet, unassuming housekeeper had a secret life as a brilliant designer. The realization hit him like a physical blow, a profound and emotional surprise that rearranged his entire perception of her. He finally understood. This was her ambition, her dream. This was what she was working toward, what she was saving for. The online courses, the tireless horse, all clicked into place. She wasn't just trying to escape a life of service, she was trying to build a life of creation. The depth of her hidden talent, nurtured in silence and secrecy, was humbling. He, who had everything handed to him, was looking at the fierce, beautiful result of pure, unadulterated grit. He gently closed the sketchbook and slid it back into its hiding place, feeling like a trespasser who had stumbled upon sacred ground. The discovery changed everything. It added a new, vibrant color to the portrait of her he was painting in his mind. She wasn't just intelligent and kind, she was a creator, an artist with a powerful voice she hadn't yet had the chance to use. It filled him with a strange mix of awe and a fierce, protective anger at a world that let such talent go unnoticed. Now her presence in the room next door felt even more significant. It was like he was sleeping next to a hidden treasure. The quiet housekeeper was gone, replaced by Zoe Scott, the designer. This secret knowledge created a new, unspoken bond between them, even though she was unaware of it. He knew he could not, would not, let this discovery go. It was a plot twist that demanded action, a destiny he suddenly felt compelled to be a part of. The sketchbook was a point of no return. Eli could no longer see Zoe as just an employee, he saw her as an equal, a peer in spirit, if not in circumstance. The awkward, forced proximity that had once been a source of tension had slowly, miraculously, transformed into a strange kind of sanctuary. The social barrier between the arrogant millionaire and the diligent housekeeper had not just been lowered. It had been demolished, brick by invisible brick. Their late-night conversations became the highlight of his day. After a suffocating evening at a charity gala, surrounded by superficial chatter and false smiles, he would return to the mansion feeling empty. He would find Zoe awake, studying at the small desk in her chamber, and they would talk. They'd speak through the open connecting door, a space that was no longer a barrier but a bridge between their two worlds, a symbol of their unlikely connection. He found more substance in a 10-minute talk with Zoe about her design inspirations than in a 3-hour dinner with industry titans. She listened, she challenged him, she made him laugh. Their conversations were real, a stark contrast to the performative interactions that defined the rest of his life. For the first time, he felt seen not for his wealth or his name, but for the man he was becoming. This was the start of a true emotional love story. He began to actively choose her company over others. He'd cancel late meetings or decline invitations, making up excuses just to be back at the mansion, hoping for one of their talks. It was a radical shift, a complete reordering of his priorities that baffled his secretary and his friends. The world of the rich and poor wasn't just coexisting in his suite, it was merging, creating a new hybrid culture that belonged only to the two of them. This growing bond was a quiet, powerful thing, nurtured in the late hours away from prying eyes. It was a secret world built on shared thoughts and mutual respect. The initial arrangement, born of disaster and resentment, had become a strange and beautiful gift. It had given him the one thing his money could never buy: a genuine human connection. He was realizing that sharing a room with her had indeed begun to change his life forever. He didn't quite have the words for what he was feeling yet. It was a confusing mix of admiration, affection, and a deep, protective instinct. All he knew was that the thought of this arrangement ending, of Zoe moving back to the staff quarters and out of his immediate life, now filled him with a profound and unexpected sense of dread. The plot twist was that he, Eli Price, was falling in love, and that was when the real trouble began. Tiffany was not a fool. She saw the shift in Eli, the way his eyes would soften when the housekeeper's name was mentioned, the way he seemed distant and disconnected from their own world. She saw the open door between their rooms and sensed the easy intimacy that flowed through it. Her jealousy, a cold and venomous thing, began to fester. She couldn't compete with Zoe's quiet authenticity, so she decided to destroy it instead. She needed Zoe gone. Her plan was cruel in its simplicity. During a visit, she slipped her own watch, a platinum, diamond-encrusted timepiece worth a small fortune, off her wrist and into the pocket of a coat Zoe had just taken to be cleaned. It was a watch Eli had given her, one he would instantly recognize. She then waited a few hours, building her manufactured panic, before declaring her precious watch had been stolen. A frantic house-wide search began. Of course, the watch was discovered by Tiffany herself, feigning shock and heartbreak as she pulled it from the pocket of Zoe's coat in the staff cleaning area. "I can't believe it," she whispered, her voice a perfect imitation of betrayal. "After you took her in, after all your kindness, she must have taken it when she collected my things." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Every staff member looked at Zoe with suspicion and disappointment. Zoe stood frozen, the color draining from her face. She was completely blindsided, trapped in a web of lies she couldn't even begin to untangle. I didn't," she stammered, her voice small. "I would never do that." But the evidence was damning. The watch was in her possession. To everyone else in the room, it was a classic, sordid tale: the poor housekeeper, tempted by the glittering wealth of the rich, finally giving in to a moment of weakness. She felt utterly humiliated, her reputation, which she had guarded so fiercely, shattered in an instant. All eyes were on Eli, waiting for the verdict from the millionaire. They expected fury, an immediate dismissal, perhaps even a call to the police. This was more than just theft, it was a personal betrayal, a violation of the trust he had shown by allowing her into his private space. Tiffany watched him, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. The silence stretched, thick with tension. Zoe looked at Eli, her eyes pleading not for mercy, but for belief. In that moment, their late-night conversations, their shared laughter, their entire fragile, burgeoning connection was on the line. He held her entire future in his hands. The love story that had barely begun was about to face its most brutal test, orchestrated by a jealous heart set on destruction. All eyes in the room were on Eli, a silent jury waiting for his judgment. The evidence was, on its surface, irrefutable. The watch, his gift to Tiffany, was found in the housekeeper's possession. It was an open and shut case. His logical mind, the one that closed multi-million-dollar deals, told him to be ruthless, fire her, make an example of her. This is what the world expected of him, the arrogant millionaire protecting his own. But his heart screamed in protest. He looked at Zoe's pale, shocked face, and he didn't see a thief. He saw the woman who spoke with such grace and strength to her struggling brother. He saw the woman who faced down Tiffany's public taunts with unshakable dignity. He remembered her quiet acts of kindness, the folk wisdom that saved his company, her unwavering integrity in every single interaction he'd had with her. The pieces just didn't fit. "I find this Difficult to believe, Eli said slowly, his voice cutting through the tense silence. His words were a surprise to everyone, most of all Tiffany, whose triumphant expression faltered for a fraction of a second. He couldn't reconcile the Zoe he was getting to know the intelligent, ambitious woman with a secret dream with the petty criminal Tiffany was painting her as. It felt wrong, a discordant note in a song he was just beginning to love. He remembered her talking about selling her grandmother's jewelry without a second thought, not for a luxury, but for her brother's education. A woman like that doesn't steal a flashy watch. It was against the very core of her character as he had come to understand it. Believing she was a thief would mean that everything he had started to feel, every late-night conversation, was based on a lie. It would mean his own judgment was fundamentally broken. The conflict inside him was immense. On one side was logic, evidence, and the world he knew. On the other was intuition, faith, and the connection he had forged with Zoe, the chasm between. The rich and poor was suddenly not about money, but about truth. His world, Tiffany's world, was one where such betrayals were commonplace. But Zoe's world, the one had been given a glimpse of, seemed to operate on a different, more honorable currency. He made a decision. It wasn't a decision based on proof, but on faith. He couldn't prove her innocence, not yet, but he couldn't bring himself to pronounce her guilty. "We will look into this matter further," he declared, his voice firm. "In the meantime, Zoe will remain here." He was drawing a line in the sand, choosing the word of a simple housekeeper over his own girlfriend. The plot twist was that he was willing to risk everything on his belief in her. And now he had to find the truth. Eli didn't delegate the investigation. This was too personal. He started that very evening, his mind sharp and focused, driven by a desperate need to prove his instincts right. He began not with the accused, but with the accuser. Tiffany's story was a little too polished, her shock a little too theatrical. He started thinking about her motives, her growing jealousy, the venom shed displayed towards Zoe from the very beginning. The first rule of any deal is to understand the players. He went to the mansion's security office and requested the surveillance footage from the hallway near the cleaning area. He spent hours poring over the grainy images, looking for something out of place, and then he found it. A small, almost imperceptible detail. Tiffany, walking down the hall alone an hour before her discovery, made a subtle movement near the coat rack where Zoe's cart was. It wasn't conclusive, but it was a crack in her story. It was the start of the redemption of Zoe's name. The real breakthrough, however, came from an unlikely source. He remembered Tiffany mentioning she had taken a call from her jeweler right before she noticed the watch was missing. On a hunch, Eli called the jeweler himself, a man he'd done business with for years. He asked about the call. The jeweler, after some prodding from a valuable client, admitted something strange. Tiffany had called him asking for the watch's official insurance valuation, something a person only does when they plan to file a claim. She had planned the entire secret setup. The truth hit Eli with the force of a physical blow. Tiffany hadn't just framed an innocent woman out of jealousy. She had orchestrated a cruel, calculated plot. He saw the full depth of her toxicity, the casual cruelty she was willing to inflict to maintain her position. It was a game to her, a move on the social chessboard, and Zoe was just a pawn to be sacrificed. The realization left him feeling sick to his stomach. He contrasted Tiffany's viciousness with Zoe's unwavering kindness. He thought of her sketchbook, her secret dream, her quiet dignity. The two worlds in her stood in stark, horrifying relief. His world, the one he had always seen as the pinnacle of success, was a glittering pit of snakes, full of lies and manipulation. Hers, the world of the so-called poor, was filled with integrity, love, and a genuine heart. He had been living in a beautiful, expensive illusion. He knew what he had to do. This wasn't just about clearing Zoe's name anymore. This was about his own redemption. It was about choosing which world he wanted to live in, He had been a willing participant in the toxic games of the rich for too long. Zoe had shown him a better way to be, and he was not going to let her be a casualty of the life he was now desperate to leave behind. He planned his next move not as a businessman, but as a man who had finally truly been changed forever. The annual black tie gala at the mansion was the social event of the season, a glittering spectacle of power and wealth. Tiffany was at Eli's side, radiant and smug, believing she had won. She had no idea she was walking into her own public execution. Eli moved through the crowd, a man on a mission, his arrogant demeanor gone, replaced by a calm, unshakable resolve. He took the stage, ostensibly to give a welcome speech, and the room fell silent. He started by speaking about value and worth, concepts everyone in the room thought they understood. We measure worth in stock prices, in carats, in real estate. He began, his voice ringing with a newfound clarity. But have recently learned we've been using the wrong metrics. He looked directly at Tiffany, whose smile began to waver. Some people, you see, appear to be priceless, but are, in fact, cheap. And some people, who appear to have nothing, are the ones who hold all the real treasure. Then, he dropped the bomb. With cold, precise detail, he laid out the entire plot. He spoke of the security footage, the call to the jeweler, the cruel, calculated setup to frame an innocent woman. He exposed Tiffany's lie in front of everyone she had ever tried to impress. The room was stunned into a collective gasp. Tiffany's face went from pale to scarlet, humiliated on a scale she could never have imagined. Our relationship, Eli stated, calmly, is over, but he wasn't finished. The woman she tried to destroy, he continued, his voice now filled with an emotional warmth, is my housekeeper, Zoe Scott, and I want you all to know that this simple housekeeper possesses more integrity, more kindness, and more raw talent than anyone in this room. He then looked toward the edge of the crowd, where Zoe stood, having been asked by him to attend. She is a brilliant designer, and I am going to be her partner in launching her own fashion label. He stepped off the stage, walked directly through the stunned crowd to Zoe, and took her hands. That forced arrangement, he said, his voice soft enough for only her to hear, but his eyes broadcasting it to the world, was the best thing that ever happened to me. It was destiny. I was an arrogant fool, and your kindness was my redemption. And then, in the ultimate plot twist of the evening, he declared, I love you, Zoe. It was a moment that would become legend, a love story for the ages that shattered the barriers between rich and poor. The journey that began with a plumbing disaster and a demeaning set of rules had ended here, in a public declaration of love and a shared dream. They had faced humiliation, secrets, and the challenge of overcoming their different worlds. And, in the end, they stood together, proof that a simple act of forced proximity had, indeed, changed a millionaire's life forever. And so, their story comes to a close. What a journey it has been. From a chaotic plumbing disaster and a list of demeaning rules to a powerful public declaration of love that shattered every social barrier. We witnessed how the cold, arrogant world of a millionaire was completely transformed by the quiet, unwavering kindness of a housekeeper. It's a powerful reminder that true worth isn't measured in dollars, but in dignity, integrity, and the courage to love. Eli and Zoe's story shows us that sometimes our greatest challenges are really destinies. Secret gifts. Their shared room, initially a prison of resentment, became the very place where redemption was found and a beautiful love story could bloom. It proves that no one is beyond changing, and that the strongest connections are often forged in the most unlikely of circumstances, bridging the gap between a world of wealth and a world of heart. We would love to know what you think. What part of their story impacted you the most? Was it the moment Eli overheard Zoe's compassionate phone call? Or her incredible grace when she was humiliated? Let us know in the comments below. Did you expect an ending like this, or were you hoping for a different desfecho? We're eager to hear your thoughts. If this story of overcoming, destiny, and love truly touched you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss what's coming next. We have so many more stories to share with you, so feel free to explore our older videos. Thank you for watching with us, and we'll see you in the next one.